morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Historically, schools rank with the Bill of Rights as one of the distinguishing characteristics of American society. But as the demands for education
You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. This is 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Historically, public schools rank with the Bill of Rights as one of the distinguishing characteristics of American society. But as the demands for education go up in the post-industrial world, the weaknesses of the schools, especially inner-city urban schools, become more glaring. 2 years ago, Congress and President Bush worked together to enact the most recent effort to improve public education. The President signed the historic No Child Left Behind in Hamilton, Ohio on January the 8th, 2002. We devote all of Newsmakers this morning to the implementation and implications of No Child Left Behind and begin with a special report prepared by 12 News reporter Jeff Hirsh.
We need to know in America. We need to know whether or not children have got the basic education.
It was a special day in January 2002 when President George W. Bush came to Hamilton, Ohio.
Thank you for such a warm welcome. It's great to be in the home of the Big Blue.
The president came here to make history, to sign the No Child Left Behind education law.
Reaching this moment has not been easy.
Now, 2 years later, Hamilton schools, along with public schools everywhere, are grappling with a whole new reality.
Take a look at your sheet up at the top where it says remember the rules.
Rules, plenty of them. More demands, more testing, more sanctions, more. What is this law going to do?
Well, when President Bush came in January, we had no idea what the bill really meant. We were just thrilled that he was here. The pride that it brought to the community was great. But since that time, in the 2-year period, we've begun to experience, like all districts across the nation, the impact of the bill and the implementation, and that's the difficult part.
President Bush did not simply pick Hamilton, Ohio out of a hat.
You know, most bills are signed at the White House, but I decided to sign this bill in one of the most important places in America, a public school.
Hamilton is in the district of Congressman John Boehner, chair of the House Education Committee and chief architect of No Child Left Behind.
This is a serious law and a serious change in the federal government's role in our K through 12 schools. For the first time, we're going to expect real results for the money that we're investing in these schools.
The helper verb always comes right before the main verb.
Hamilton fourth grade teacher Ensconcia Mitchell can feel the change already.
I worry about my students not doing well, not so much because I'm worried about the pressure on me, but I worry about them in the future.
Hamilton is an urban district, half the kids from low-income families, including a fast-growing Hispanic immigrant population. Half of Mitchell's class is Hispanic. In other classes, it's even more. Hispanic and African-American students have always lagged behind their white counterparts.
Never before in the history of our country have we attempted to educate all of our children. Oh, we say it, and we've got public schools, and we've had public education, but we've never really been serious about giving them an education.
Ensconcia Mitchell might not exactly agree. She's serious about getting her class to learn and to pass a key part of the No Child Left Behind law, proficiency tests.
I try to pick activities that are interesting for the students, things that they can do things hands-on and they can really get involved in it so that it's not so much just paper and pencil, but where they're talking, they're discussing with me and discussing with their classmates and doing projects.
Among other things, No Child Left Behind mandates annual testing in reading and math for grades 3 through 8. Test scores are broken out by subgroups: racial, disabled, non-English speakers, low income. All students are supposed to make adequate yearly progress. And there are sanctions for schools where students fail to do that. Sanctions which increase in severity over 5 years, such as letting kids transfer, tutoring, bringing in an entirely new staff, or perhaps even bringing in a private management company if test scores continue to lag.
Nathalie, what's our main verb for number 8?
Hamilton is Ohio's highest performing urban district. Out of 5 possible levels, this district is in level 3. But Jefferson Elementary, where Ensconcia Mitchell teaches, fell to the bottom rating because of No Child Left Behind. That's because the new law says all students have to take the same tests. No longer can you exempt special ed kids or kids not fluent in English, kids who would not do so well on the proficiencies.
When we say no child left behind, it's exactly what we mean, no child left behind.
Critics say the goal is noble, but the reality is some special ed kids will never pass proficiency tests, and to label a school as failing for that reason is unfair. The Bush administration has budged a bit, letting a tiny percentage of special ed kids have alternate testing, but not many.
What we're trying to do here is to change the whole focus of special ed to one of producing results.
But results cost money. No Child Left Behind comes with $5 billion more federal dollars. But that money is divided among thousands and thousands of public schools, schools which now have to deal with costly new requirements.
For example, in our district with the growing Hispanic population, we've had to add tutors and ESL teachers.
What is one of the 5 senses that we use to learn?
And of course that comes from our general fund. So I think that's where people are looking at, it as being an unfunded mandate. Intervention, before and after school programs, summer schools. Those are all programs that are funded to a large extent by general fund dollars.
Smelling and tasting.
All well-intentioned programs, of course, all necessary, most would agree. But local taxpayers do not always agree to pay for them, sometimes turning down school levies. That means schools have to cut at the same time No Child Left Behind requires them to do more. And there are other questions as well.
While No Child Left Behind passed Congress with bipartisan support, a lot of criticism has been growing lately, and those critics say there is simply too much testing.
Yes, I think we're going overboard.
Kent Seidel is a professor of education at the University of Cincinnati. He's been studying the standardized testing issue for 15 years. Seidel says standardized tests certainly do have a place, perhaps with a sample of students to track trends.
And a lot of schools do that. A lot of schools use those standardized tests very effectively. Quite a few don't. It's a red herring. They focus on the tests. They end up doing the drill and kill kinds of approach with the students, and they get into this ironic kind of downward spiral where they're making the teaching and learning less fun for the kids in an effort to help them, get better at mastering what they want them to learn.
So will test every kid every year really make major improvements?
I think we're fooling ourselves with that one.
Seidel says it's more important to identify good teaching practices and reinforce those.
Planning is our action verb.
But backers of No Child Left Behind say frequent testing will help.
I don't think there's any question that No Child Left Behind is going to bring real results for our schools. It really does require schools to focus in on each and every child and to make a determination about what type of help they need so that they can show progress in overall test scores. And if they don't, these numbers, these test scores are going to become public. And the most important part about the law is not written in the law anywhere. And that's that these test scores are going to be published. We're going to have a conversation in every community in America over the next 3 or 4 years about why we're not doing better or how well we're doing or what does it take to educate all of our kids.
Read the sentence on your own.
Teachers like Ensconcia Mitchell are caught in the middle. Some say frequent standardized testing will help, others say it won't. So is it good, is it bad, or is it just is?
It just is. It's good because it makes all of the teachers more focused on what they need to teach. And maybe the only thing that's probably bad about it is the stress that it puts on teachers and the community and on the students.
There are other demands as well. No Child Left Behind requires highly qualified teachers in all classrooms, fully certified and competent in their subject areas. That's not a problem in Hamilton, but could mean more expenses for rural districts where one teacher sometimes has different grades and subjects. No Child Left Behind also mandates something which even the law's strongest backers concede is impossible. All students will be proficient, passing their achievement tests by 2014. Critics like Democratic presidential hopeful Howard Dean say that provision means thousands of schools will unfairly be labeled as failing. But the law's authors say 100% is simply a goal.
What was the number? 95%? 90%? We're going to throw 5% of our kids away? It was unrealistic to have any other number than 100%. Now, do we think we can actually get there? It'll be difficult.
Boehner says the law has to be reauthorized twice between now and 2014, so there will inevitably be changes, although the intent, which President Bush laid out in Hamilton 2 years ago, will not waver.
We want to make sure no child is left behind. Every child must learn to read.
And as for those on the front lines, teachers like Ensconcia Mitchell, whatever happens, they'll have to deal with it. But this fourth grade teacher does have a message for the policymakers about the law.
If I could rewrite it, I think the one thing that I would want is for more teachers to be able to be involved in writing those laws because they know the students.
And they say they know what it really takes for no child to be left behind.
And right there, they have an example for you.
Jeff Hirsh, 12 News.
My class is painting a talent show.
Stay tuned. After the break, an in-depth discussion of the implications of No Child Left Behind.
Probably for parents who are going to start seeing this.
Very.
Welcome back. To discuss what we have learned from 2 years of implementing No Child Left Behind and where we go from here, I am joined this morning by Dr. Terry Joyner, the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Chief Academic Officer, actually, for the Cincinnati Public Schools, and Diana Porter, the Program Facilitator for the Teaching Performance and Technology at Hughes Center, and 12 News reporter Jeff Hirsh, who did a lot of research on No Child Left Behind to prepare the report that we've just seen. Welcome to everybody.
Good morning.
In the 2 years, Terry, that you've, since this law has been passed, what practically has it meant for the Cincinnati Public Schools?
Not a whole lot different for us. We had a lot of the tenets of and the spirit of No Child Left Behind already in place in Cincinnati Public. We had a high stakes accountability system. We had structures for supporting schools, for sanctions and rewards put in place for rewarding schools who are helping children make progress. So the spirit of the law wasn't such a disconnect for us. It was some of the technical fine points of the law that were a challenge.
Okay, and we can get into those as we go along. Diana, for you as a classroom teacher and being out in the schools, has there been an impact of this law for you? Is either measurable sorts of things or spirit and mood?
I think there's quite a few ways that you can see it in the classroom. This year, my 10th graders have to take 26 tests. Plus, if they failed the 9th grade proficiency test, they still are in that loop and have to take any leftover proficiency tests twice this year.
When you say they have to take 26 tests, 26 standardized tests?
Well, we have our benchmarks from the district trying to help them prepare for the new OGT. You see, even though the 10th grade piece hasn't, the new graduation test at 10th grade hasn't yet been in place, it's still a benchmark for No Child Left Behind. So they have to take reading and mathematics for No Child Left Behind, even though it's not a high stakes test for them personally, only for our school.
Okay.
The 9th grade proficiency test is still their high stakes test. So what is exactly the reason for them to do well on this 10th grade test? They're already sort of tired from taking these other tests. Then they're given this test that's a high-stakes test for the school, but not for them personally. So it's a time of change, a lot of confusion for the students. It is called No Child Left Untested sometimes by teachers because of the huge burden, especially in this transition, to try to make students aware of what this new test is going to mean for them.
Well, I mean, that, as you saw, and obviously as you know, there's very conflicting opinions as to whether all these tests are good. And I know some teachers and some students will tell you, all right, we've got a nice logical curriculum here. Okay, let's drop everything and now study for these tests.
That's exactly what
okay,
happens.
now let's get back. And are all these tests really going to help, or is it simply testing for the sake of testing?
Well, that isn't what should happen, that you drop everything for the test. We've realigned our standards, the things that we're supposed to teach every day in the classroom, to this test, theoretically. But in practice, in this transition period, the standards shift. 1 year it looks like this, now we're going to teach more chemistry and less biology, and then the new test from our state comes out, oh, it has more biology and less chemistry. So the book we bought last year doesn't work anymore. Now we have to get new materials and develop new strategies in the classroom. So the burden on the teacher in this transition period is enormous.
But conceptually, you know, let's assume at some point in time down the road, these tests will reach some sort of consistency. Conceptually, is it a good idea to just have all these tests, or is it simply drill and kill, as the professor said.
Well, as Kent did point out, there are opportunities to take tests and actually use them to inform instruction. That's one of the reasons that you see a lot of testing. Right now there are banks of tests that are in place for high stakes accountability, for end of the year summative kinds of information. But then there's also ongoing tests to help a teacher inform, as Diana has said, to look at what's happening with a student this month. And what do we do with this student so that we know that that student will be on track for achievement at the end of the year. And so there's two types of testing happening, although everyone looks at it as testing. Part of it is to really inform instruction, what good teachers do every day. And then the other part is a high stakes sort of layered on testing approach that comes from the federal mandate.
One of the things about testing in this new No Child Left Behind, as I understand it, one of the controversies around the country is who has to be tested. And now, in the past, I understand local districts and states might have said, you know, children who have severe learning disabilities, we're not going to count their scores in. Students who have trouble with English, who maybe a foreign language is their first language, we're not going to count their scores as in the same way we count. Now, all of those students have to be counted in. Am I right on that? That
Yes.
this is one of the areas of real concern?
Absolutely. 95% of the students should be in the test pool. The state is not going to count us as making adequate yearly progress regardless of our results if we haven't assessed at least 95% of our students. And then we can only exempt 1% of our special needs students. And so you're right, all of the students are in, and it is a stressful situation for children who have not been assessed in the past and who have not been instructed based upon those standards.
A question with special needs students. When you say 1% in a schools district the size of Cincinnati, which is the largest in our area, how many students are we exempting?
We are
round numbers.
We should be looking at 1% of students with disabilities. We have 8,000 students with disabilities.
So we're talking 80?
80.
So a student who is severe, and I mentioned this to Diana before the show, I have a nephew who is severely mentally challenged, you know, operates basically at a fifth grade level, or five-year-old level. He's 15 years old. He's never going to, if numbers-wise you can't exempt him, he has to be counted in.
No, that child would be a child that would naturally be exempt from.
If the numbers were.
But if the numbers were.
If the
and
numbers
so
were.
they don't spread out equally across every
One of the
district.
other areas that Jeff raised in his package is the question of qualifications of teachers. And we've heard a lot about this in some smaller rural states and rural districts. But does that have any implication in the Cincinnati public schools?
Absolutely, it has a huge implication, especially in special ed math and science, the high deficiency areas in urban districts around the country. I teach in the High School for Teaching and Technology, and we're an urban magnet academy started by the district, the teachers union, and the university to try to interest young people in becoming teachers. So we started a long time ago the whole process of growing your own teachers. Young people who came through the Cincinnati public schools understand the students and can go on to get a teaching degree and come back and teach. And we're starting to see some of our grads come back into the school district, but still, especially in math and science, there are shortage areas in the urban districts. Our school alone has unqualified teachers teaching in math and science, unqualified from the government's point of view. One's an engineer who's come back to teach math, but doesn't have a teaching degree yet. He's in school.
And what are the implications of that? How long can that go on before something happens?
Well, we don't know yet. At this point, we are required to notify parents that their child is in a class with a teacher who has not been deemed highly qualified. But at this point, the law doesn't actually say what happens as a result of that. So I think they're looking at the parent then to make the request to either move a child or to put the pressure on the system to make sure that all of the teachers are highly qualified.
Is the bottom line to all of this money, in other words, if more money was provided to fund the demands of No Child Left Behind, this would be wonderful? Or are there certain things that you could put billions of dollars into it and it simply doesn't make any sense?
I think money is always a benefit in trying to implement any kind of laws and regulations. However, when you look at the special needs criteria for testing and requirements for testing, there's still going to be more children in urban school districts that are going to exceed the 1% rule. And so that's not going to actually help us. It helps us teach them, but we're still going to be held accountable for not being able to bring them to adequate yearly progress.
There are those who say that this whole law, or at least some of the underpinning philosophy, is simply an attack on public education. You are setting up standards that are literally impossible to reach, and therefore when they are impossible to reach, the whole system comes under fire, and you have these various alternatives of a private management and charter schools. Do you agree with that this is basically setting things up to fail?
I think it is putting us in a situation that makes it very difficult for us to meet adequate yearly progress for 100% of our students at the end of 12 years.
Jeff, let me ask you a question. Do charter schools, private schools, Catholic schools have to meet these goals?
Charter schools do, private schools do not.
Private schools do not. So that would mean the parochial schools are exempted from this?
To the best of my knowledge, that's correct.
And it's only the public charters.
Right, but publicly funded charter schools, which are public schools and therefore do have to meet the same standards.
You know,
now, critics will tell you they don't, but on paper they do.
One of the other things that, on this qualifications questions, besides teachers, anybody who's had children in Cincinnati Public Schools knows that there's also assistants, teaching assistants in those classrooms too. Does this law affect who can be an instructional assistant?
Absolutely, and that's, I think, it's going to be one of our greatest challenges. We have about 800, as we call them IAs, instructional assistants in our system. About 600 of those people under the law are not highly qualified.
So 600 out of 800?
Out of 800. And they have until the year 2006 to either get a 2-year degree, to complete 2 years of college, or to pass a test that certifies that they have the knowledge and skills to be able to work with students in the classroom. 600.
But this is one more place that puts pressure on the money issues, because if they're going to get a degree, they're going to have to be paid more. And this is an unfunded mandate. It says you have to get more education for some of your personnel, and you're going to have to pay them more, but you're not going to get any more money. Now, I know here in Cincinnati just this week there was an editorial by Armstrong Williams claiming that there was a 40% increase in federal funding to public education through No Child Left Behind, and that is just not true. There's been a reallocation of money through the titles. Title V, they took $600 million out of Title V, which was a partnership money, and put it in Title I, but it's not more money for public schools. And I think people have to understand there's so many pieces of this legislation. It demands so much, and we're getting no more resources to do it.
Jeff, in fact, as you look around the country, this question of unfunded mandates, some local districts and some states are taking this very seriously. Right?
Reading, Pennsylvania is suing to try to either get out from under these restrictions or to get them changed. And some states are talking about, even Vermont, when Howard Dean was there, was talking about, well, maybe we should just not take the federal money and get out from these strings. I think it's a little easier to do in a rural, small state like Vermont or Wyoming or places like that, which are at least thinking about this. No one's done it to my knowledge, but there are some places going, you know, these strings are just too stringent.
I think as people start seeing the schools narrow the curriculum to teach more towards the test, and even if it's done well, they're going to be testing in language arts, math, and science, leaving social studies completely out of the loop. And I can see schools starting to give less and less emphasis on democratic principles, on good citizenship, on very important areas that we're trying to work with our students.
I'm sorry.
And in addition to that, and we also move away from teaching the standards rather than teaching to the test, which is a different concept. It's a much larger concept, broader concept, teaches children how to learn rather than what to learn. And so, as Diana says, we are really narrowing the focus because we're getting very desperate on teaching to the test.
Philosophically, though, do you feel that at least the law is well-intentioned, and if it's fine-tuned or maybe partially blown up, it can work, or is this something that is like, no, forget it?
I think the law is the best thing for children of color, for children who have limited English proficiency, and children of special needs, because it actually does put some accountability in making sure that we're addressing their needs. How we measure that is a challenge, but it does now make us go back and focus on, are those children truly learning in a school that, quote unquote, is achieving?
I think it will be an exercise in helping us see more of that, where the gaps are between groups in our society. Whether this is a way to cure those gaps, I'm not sure.
This is not just, and we're almost out of time, this is not just, by the way, a urban situation.
Right.
A lot of suburban schools are finding a great deal of difficulty with this law too. So it's not just, I don't want to draw
Right.
a distinction between urban and all other schools. We're basically out of time. We've only scratched the surface, but thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your work in the schools, and I'm sure you're going to be back. Jeff, wonderful report.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.